active things. The thing that usually doesn't really work is that each notebook is bound to have one language for the entire document. So the first thing that with .NET Interactive is that, but you know, a lot of libraries that come around to that they wrap JavaScript to let you do plotting and things like that. That's quite annoying. Why not being able to have more than one language? Why not having the ability to let them talk to each other? So now, if you can see my screen, and let me zoom in a little bit more here, for example, in .NET Interactive, you see that in a notebook I've got more than one language being supported. You can say I got C#, HTML, and JavaScript. And the thing that I can do with that is that I can start doing eval. I have declared a variable x in C#. I create a div, which is empty at the moment. And now in JavaScript, I want to go fetch the value of x, and then I want to select the DOM element that I've done and put it in. So at this point, you can see that having the ability to switch to the right tool as you go is quite useful. And that's because each language is got its own strength, and also each language got its own toolkit. JavaScript is quite powerful when it comes to library for visualization and all those kind of things. And then at this point, being able to interop opens a lot of possibility. Of course, we started, usually notebooks are quite popular with data scientists, but those kind of approaches are not the only thing that you can do with notebook. And today we're going to see a few other interesting demos where we're going to do a couple of things that are not entirely what classic data science would do, but it's a data scientist approach to an IT job. In .NET Interactive, each cell or each language is its own kernel. So these things can do quite a few things. And now I want to show you a little bit of example where, for example, let me show you some interesting piece of code. Now, this is another place where we're gonna have, I don't know if have any of you heard about the project Reactor by any chance?
I haven't. No.
That's the technology. Oh, so that's been released on the 18th of May by Bart Smet, the man that gave us RX and all those things. So reactive extension, and Reactor is the engine that was behind Cortana. So you were able to formulate observables or streams of events and queries, but they become long running. In this example, what we're going to do is that, and I just quickly run through to show you what's possible. Using .NET Interactive, I define a custom commands. So now we're gonna have commands that are a stream of events that are coming from an IoT scenario. This is a house giving us the reading of the thermostat temperature, and the server is gonna try to decide when to turn it on and off. So we just declare the class straight into the notebook. So I am not using any additional package. So I'm extending the system as I go. I get access to the kernel, and then now I'm gonna load my visualization, which is a WebGL visualization of a house. And then I'm gonna load data in, and I'm gonna start pumping them through. And as I pump them through, is from a log. You can see that I'm able to make C# drive JavaScript. And this is just to give you the full overview on how rich an output could actually be, and the fact that you've been able to interoperate between language can take you to this kind of utilities. The reason also being polyglot is quite interesting when it comes to, more often than not, prototyping. Let me close this and this, and let me show you in a little bit more This notebook, and we're going to look at this one. So this, for example, is a workbook where what we want to do, we are downloading a CSV on the fly, processing using data frames library. You can load packages on the fly. So one of the Net Interactive is to be really portable. That means that the notebook itself is able to describe the whole dependency graph. One of the classic things when you got this rapid prototyping tool is that they've got the simple document, the simple query, but then all the other information that they are somehow on your environment. So how do you make things working across all machines, about really this notebook being reproducible? And one of the shortcomings that so far has been in some of the implementation of notebooks is that you have installed the modules on your system and then you just import them in the notebook. Then you give me the notebook, I try to run it, and I don't see the same visualization. So what's going to happen with this one is that I'm going to use Powershell at this point to fetch my data. With C#, I'm going to do a little bit of cleanup. Then I'm going to load dynamically a data frame library, which is data frame is a way to manipulate a tabular kind of data format. And then what I'm going to do here is that given that, I'm going to scan it and building a time series out of the table. So now, unfortunately, this thing goes from the beginning of the pandemic. So you're going to see that we got quite a few data points. And then, like we said before, I want to render this. Now, one of the very common library you might come across in plotting is Plotly. And Plotly.js is very powerful. And there's so many other modules that they wrap them, like Python libraries, F# like Xplot, and so on. But in this case, what I wanted to do is to really bring it in on the fly and build my plotting function, because I have a custom layout in mind. And some of the way you do things in JavaScript do not really translate well into any other language. Like in this case, you can say that the layout object in Plotly is based on the fact that I can add keys with specific names. So unless I go down the path of having dictionary of objects in C#, there's not really a decent way to do this as quickly as I can do directly with a native language that was designed. And then now I can toss it out and get it to render. So now this visualization is actually querying the C# variable that I've built with the time series, moving across and animating the Plotly, where I've got my interactive charts. I can move around, zoom, and see the progression of the pandemic from the beginning. And this is where really being able to be polyglot. The other thing is that usually to be able to have rich formatting is something that is done by the front end. While in Net Interactive, we have the notion of being able to produce a lot of different output, which is called, that's what we call the formatting API. And in the formatting API, let me open a formatting notebook. Give you an idea. Is that formatting out of the box, we tend to prefer rich visualization. So in this case, if you got collections, that's how they get printed out in a tabular format. So that is a little bit more interesting than looking at a simple, two-string version of them. If it's a dictionary, for example, the default behavior that we've got is to swap the index for the key value. But then what if I got an object never seen before? We have a default behavior that treats an object as a table. So that therefore, if you have a collection of them, you can imagine that we index and then we give headers based on the fields. And then again, you've seen how this works in dictionary. Now, the thing that becomes more interesting is that we tend to give an out-of-the-box behavior, but sometimes you get to things like this one that is not really understandable. So at this point, I'm adding a new field. And notice that as I'm going through, this being interactive is C#, but I'm able to redefine types as I go. So pretty much the same way you would do with Python and all these report kind of experiences. As you can see, I'm redefining that type again. And I had no errors. I added a new property that wasn't there before, which is the list of friends. And then next step, where this one is not that useful, I can then tap into the out-of-the-box API for formatting. And here you can see that now I have changed that. Oh, when you see the array, so here for person, if I see a group of people, then just write person instead of the name. And now I change it to write the name. And then I can even go down the file using, and this again, it comes out of the box with the Net Interactive. You have like a DSL that lets express DOM element. So at this point, I'm building a span with a bold and then an italic text. And then I'm printing the name of the person. So if you get a collection of persons, then that's what I do. And this is the building block for everything that then you see where we create outputs and charting and plotting. I don't know if you've got any questions so far.
I've got one. Let's say you create an object in something with a loose type system like JavaScript, and you then consume that object in another in C#, for instance. Is that consumed as a dynamic,
Yeah.
or how do you convert between the two?
So when you go, that depends on. Again, we have this concept of Mime type. So when you go out of C#, if you go to other .NET languages, then, and if we are in process, we're able to actually share the same instance. Of course, when you cross, like you said, from .NET and JavaScript, then we have to adopt some form of serialization. So at this point, what you do is depending on the way you ask that value. For example, when you go, of course, from .NET out to JavaScript, if you have defined a custom JSON formatter, and by JSON formatter, I don't really mean, it could really be in the API where we define, let me show you when that's the most important bit, is that when you define formatter in the Net Interactive, you define the Mime type. When JavaScript is asking C# to give variables, it says, I would prefer to see an application JSON Mime type for this variable that I'm asking. If you don't say anything, it's doing the normal .json. But if you define a custom formatter that maps to application JSON, that's what's going to happen. So then you can control how that object crosses the boundaries. Because of course, usually the problem, and that's where GraphQL is a good example, is never the shape of where you start. What you are mostly interested when you acquire a data point is the shape that data point has to conform with. So usually you really want to also explain how you want that value to be transformed, unless you're really sharing the same instance.
Okay.
At the moment, sharing from getting the value back from like C# getting a variable from JavaScript is not supported. That's something we're working at the moment, because of the way we execute. Right now, when you execute a JavaScript, the normal notebook way is to actually emit HTML that contains a script tag. So there is not really a decent concept of execution flow. While what we're doing at the moment is that we're working on the fact that when you actually say, I want to do JavaScript, you are submitting the JavaScript code to a kernel implementation that runs in a JavaScript environment, at this point, you can send all the commands that you want, including give me variable. And then this marshalling, I don't know if you've seen API like Playwright. Usually when you get the variable, you will tell you that how you want it to get out. So if you have a strongly type that you've defined on the C# side of the wall and say, give me variable A from JavaScript as, then you're pipelining the things into, I'm getting a JSON type, and I'm going to transform it using the target type that you tell me.
Okay, great. Were there any other questions from people?
Yes, please. Yeah, if I could ask one. This looks lovely. It's really interesting to see this. You've got if I understand it correctly, a sort of linear pipeline of things going down between these different code fragments running in each kernel. What sort of performance do you get when you string quite a lot of these together? Does it run fairly smoothly?
Performance-wise, you are running like CSI or FSI. So the performance of this is the same as normal .NET. So you're not losing any, there is no interpretation. You do the submission, there is a little bit of overhead at the beginning, but then once the pipeline, because everything is lazily initialized, and kernel might require to have things until you go for the first submission on C#, the environment is not fully bootstrapped.
Yeah.
After you've done that, the performance is very quick, because the code going on the other time is jittered. So on the other side is Roslyn. So the actual runtime is it's very, very close to a normal .NET application you're running. The overhead is really between the click and I get it back, but the click is done by the user. So compared to running a program, because the user usually goes down cell by cell, the latency is hidden behind the click speed and the scrolling speed. But the C#, the .NET performance and the JavaScript as well, once it's in the kernel, it goes to the speed that the Chrome V8 or Node will eval the JavaScript.
Okay. Yeah.
So there is no cost to that. The thing that was interesting, right? We started with data scientists, but then as you're doing C# and F#, you've seen it, Powershell is already there. And Powershell was contributed by the Powershell team, because the next thing is, oh yeah, while I'm doing whatever I do, I need to bring data in. And PowerShell was one of the common things that were happening, at least in Microsoft, to have shell automation that could work cross-platform. And the PowerShell, when you see running that, is not calling a PowerShell, is coming and shipping with PowerShell. So by installing the Net Interactive, you bring PowerShell wherever you go. So it's the new PowerShell core. The thing that becomes interesting is when the next big question and asking from the user, where to please, I need to get data in. I want to use SQL. At this point, the problem was we keep growing, and we keep growing very fast. The more kernel we put in the product, the bigger it becomes. And do you need all of them? Usually not. So the first thing that we started designing was really to have the Net Interactive extensible at runtime. And that meant that I can download packages. And if packages contains special bits in the right place, they get to extend the Net Interactive on the fly. So right now, what I'm doing, I'm loading a package that is bringing types, but is also modifying the way the Net Interactive works. And it could add new behavior, new formatting, but also adding completely new languages, adding new commands to the system. So at this point, it's easy enough for anybody to bring along additional languages, additional tooling. And, oh, well, this is something that I jumped. So when you when you need to bring in values, usually you will dump things in a file, but you can even grab them from URL, and then you want to reuse them across different cells. So the ability that we've got is that we can load into a key value pair kernel, which is called the value kernel. These hash bang are directives, or what in the notebook jargon they call magic commands. They are really, think of them like directive things that they modify the behavior, or they trigger an action that might affect how the code execution goes. Or they can tell you how to run. So this one is telling that I want to use the hashbang value kernel, and I want you to read from this file and keep it like this. Now in C#, I'm going to say that I want to share the value from the value kernel. I want you to get this and this. This means that now in C#, I have a variable called server logs of type string, which is actually the payload that was loaded here. And if I go to F#, so now I'm switching this cell to F#, I don't have anything like that. But let's be cheeky, and instead of getting them from value, we get them from C#. And now, if I go in another F# cell, it's just to prove to you that I am doing F#. Now, if I go here and I ask for I've got the server logs. And the other thing that is interesting here is that we also give you a way to expand on what normally language services would do. And in this one, for example, if you've got a variable and you're doing over, you're going to see the current value. So now you got this kind of blend, as you can see, that you've got the classic things that you would have in an IDE, like when you're writing in Visual Studio, but then you also got the behavior that you would have in a debugger, because you work in an interactive environment. You've got the static aspect of the code, but also as you go through, you are declaring values, declaring types. So there is good question, John. In this specific case, it is by reference, because the topology, and I'm going to show you also a slide about the architecture. Kernel can be all in the same process, or even distributed in different way, out of the process or completely out of the machine. When they are, there is a special case of kernel, which are called the .NET kernel. We call them .NET kernel because we know that they would be PowerShell, C#, F#. So they are .NET languages. When you do a share between these three, if they are in process, that share is by reference. There is no copy. And we can play with that later, and I can show the classic example. You create a collection in C#, you do the share in F#, you add it, and then you print it, even in JavaScript, by asking JavaScript to fetch it from the C# kernel. And then you can see the whole round trip where C# built it, F# got it. And that's another interesting things to talk about, because when people were thinking of what it means to have polyglot piece of code, the original things, even when we're discussing, a lot of people will tell you, oh, what I mean is, can C# run Python? So it sounds more like an orchestration. But the real thing that you really want, you very rarely want C# to execute Python. It's not, the fact is that Python might have easier, more clever, or different technology to manipulate something. So you want Python to transform an information and you want it back. So that's where all these behavior move from being polyglot needs to have a mean to share value. So that I have a value object and then it moves somewhere else, that something else will transform it. And the orchestrator here is really the notebook, because as you go through the cell, you are driving those execution, you decide the order on how quickly they go, but there is no need for having, like a python.eval from C# when you can have then C# to control a Python interpreter, or vice versa, because then it becomes, there has been few attempts to do that, kind of working. And of course, where they die is when you are returning like numbers, because then at this point, when they try to deserialize and transform these things, you go through boxing and unboxing. So that's why sharing types is complicated. Sharing their value, not that much. It's got other problems, but that's more doable. Sharing the value 1, it's easier than sharing the integer 1 across different language. So this is an exercise, and to give you a little bit of context, what happened here is that there was a little bit of a nice story where we are a company that sells product, and guess what? We are the adventure works kind of people. And customers have complained that they've got issues because some pages are very slow to load. Then, of course, customer reports that, and then we get a beautiful call where we get told this stuff doesn't work. And actually, let me show you the whole workflow. That's where things becomes a little bit more close to, sorry, close to what we usually do. At this point, we're loading a utility. We load the value like you've seen before. And then we want to pass the JSON. This is the feed that came from the user. Now we need to watch this. Now with the extension, I have loaded the Interact Data Explorer. So that is an extension that lets me use the Interact Data Explorer, which gives you a mean to just print things out and visually explore. So the user complained about being slow. I have loaded the user feedback, and I want to see. Okay, let's do something. Reason as it is. Let's see what are the reason that they're complaining all about, and all the reports are about being slow. Okay, but as I can see, I got quite a bunch of different URLs. Then next thing, let's bring in the server logs. I'm displaying that with this. It's a little bit longer than the other ones, so I don't think. I got 50 pages. So let's go with the smart people, and I'm going to use Sundance. Sundance is a tool, again, for data exploring. I don't know if you ever came across. It's from Microsoft Research. There is modules that you can use in Power BI too, and it's a WebGL accelerated visualization, where at this point, let's do this. Let's look at I want to see all the URL, but I want to pass it by response time. Then let's see what we've got. actually. But when I look at this one, the biggest bucket I've got is really 22 to 24 milliseconds. So server side, I can see anything awkward. And those are on the pages, the logs from the server. So at this point, question is, are we doing anything slow serving them, or is there anything that is awkward in the data? Now my database here is a SQL server. So now I'm going to bring in another extension that gives me the way to connect. So it's adding a new kernel, which is the SQL kernel, where essentially now I've got the ability to do few things. The things that I can do is that I can now connect to a SQL, but that connection is now for me a cell where I can write code. And when I can also have completion. And now let's do that, because what I can do now is that I can connect. And what's good with this is that even the magic commands, they are treated as language query. So I can have completion. It's telling me, oh, now I've got an MS SQL option. Let's do that one. What do I need? Oh, kernel name. So you see, it's helping me building this stuff up. The kernel name is an alias that I'm going to be able to use later to make sure that it's a binding between the connection I'm building and a name, so that later on I can address that kernel. Say this SQL statement running here. The other thing that now is interesting is that I've got this option, the create kernel context. Now, the create DB context is that because being .NET, what I can do is that as I connect, I'm also going to ask it to do one thing more for me on the fly, to build for me a C# variable, which is actually an entity framework context, so that if I need to go back to C#, I've got the same connection. It's added a new language, which is the SQL Adventure Works. And the thing that is interesting here is that, as you might see, is that now I'm connected, and this is going to give me a way to inspect the schema through IntelliSense as I go. I run the query, 150, so I'm getting the products. And now there is one problem, though, which is going to be addressed. But I have a JSON file that contains URL that people complained about. When we were looking at it, we realized that I can actually find out the product ID from the way the URL is built. Querying the database, it's cool, but it would be even cooler if I can do that by focusing on the IDs that I want. Thankfully, I've asked it also to build an entity framework context. So what I'm going to do now is that I'm going to build, taking all those URI, and take the distinct product IDs. Is 48. So people are complaining, all the pages that I've got complaints about is 48 products. And now I'm going to use that one to actually make the query. So now I have queried those products. Let's see if that's got to do, maybe it's a category of things. I don't know. Maybe my database is doing data sharding, and different categories, they live within different performance session or things like that. So I'm going to use Sundance again. And the first thing that I would like to see is that I'm going to look at categories, but those 48 things, they span pretty much everything. But this is not interesting. So there is no, I can't see. So if I facet by product categories or any other information that the product is giving me, I don't see subcategories. It's all over the place. So clearly it doesn't look like this is giving me any hint that they have a problem, but user can add comments to those. And when they get loaded with comments and things like that. So
sorry, Diego.
Next question.
Diego, that looks pretty powerful, that
Yep.
graphing tool you've got in it. You may have mentioned it, but I missed it. What exactly is that graphing tool you've got there?
This is called Sundance, and Sundance is a very, very cool tool. Yeah, let me bring that up. Was born in Microsoft Research and has been now put out in quite few different sources. So if you go to GitHub, the tool is very cool, and it's cool. This is a tool for telling a story about data. This is not the reporting tool. It's the exploring tool. And these things surfaces in quite few ways, including a VS Code extension. So if you go a CSV file, you can just open that through Sundance in VS Code. But then, of course, with usually the problem is that if you need to dump those things on disk, like what I would have been doing here. So really, you want to shortcut the thing. So let's look at something here. So here, what I want to do is that I'm going to do the same query, joining on, and find out if I got exceedingly long comments. Notice that I keep overriding the same data. So I'm doing this cell by cell, so they just keep an history. But this would have been something you keep just doing in the same cell. There is no problem by overriding. This is a different type. So this iQueryable, because I've adding new things, is a new different type. So it would have clashed in a normal C# with the previous one. So I can quickly move through things. And if I let's do a tree map, and then I group by length of the comment. The some are big, and now I can select the group, and let's look at what the big ones are. Is 161 characters, 200. So to me, and then you can now have the color to remap to the range. It doesn't look like much, right? 160 character, it doesn't sound of anything dangerous. But let's do something. Let's bring in actually the comment. And if I bring in the comment, rerun the query, let's revisualize this thing. Let me group them again. Comment length. Nothing's right. Oh. Let's look at this one. So this one of the object incriminated is got, say, those product ID have got comments which leads to execute crypto mining with JavaScript. Ooh. If you remember, I had 48 problems. Really, what's the real count? Actually, I've got 148 unique products that have got that kind of injection. So the problem at this point in the database is bigger than the one reported. And now I can go home and pass this over to the engineers. So my job is done. And that's a classic thing where you see a workflow that is more something that data scientists would do. But this was a classic troubleshooting of a live issue on my system. and this to expand a little bit more, if we want to see the variable sharing that you were talking about sharing the value reference, you can see that I'm printing out the string X, which is this one, but then I'm building a collection in F#. I'm adding a value. I get it from C#. I see both, but that would still be old if that was a copy. But if I go back in F# and I print list, you can see that the object, the variable the F# got is the same reference. The value that you've seen, it is powerful, because you see me doing that to just bring in a piece of data on the fly. But usually another annoying stuff is somebody's giving you a chunk of text, which is a CSV. Somebody's giving you a chunk of text, which is JSON. You need to do stuff with that. The classic thing is that you hope that Visual Studio will help you when you paste it in to do the right escaping, so you can put it into a variable and parse it or use it for loading in a data frame kind of things. But in this case, the value kernel lets you put anything as a literal. So the thing you see me doing before, where I was loading from a file, I give you a bunch of JSON, you drop it in, then like you've seen, you get it back in C#, and now we use JSON to parse it. And now I'm printing the object. You've seen the file, that was cool. But here, you can actually take it, and now look at this. That is text, but that text is a page that I downloaded. And now it is a value that is accessible and shareable with the kernel. Clever choice. And then I was telling you about the Mime type. Well, if I say that this thing is JSON, then now the printing here is using the JSON formatter for the visualization. So now it's actually a JSON object. As you can see, it's not just a piece of text. It can collapse and explore.
Diego, could I ask a question about something you mentioned earlier, please?
Absolutely.
I don't know if it was that you were telling us that this was something that was running behind the scenes, but you mentioned Project Reactor. And I just wondered, you mentioned that the shared variables between the different kernels are shared by reference and so on. Is it possible to have observables?
Yeah.
If you can do that, can you? That was what you maybe showed us in an earlier example, right?
Yeah, yes. Let me see this one. This one is not exactly Reactor, because when I built this demo, Reactor wasn't live. This is simulating the last mile post Reactor. This one is a project from that is by friends and Engine. They've been contributing quite a few significant changes to Dot Net Interactive. And this is a project that they did around the IAS, which is essentially this is a smaller version of a more complex project called Ocean Mines. Essentially what we're going to do here is that we are going to read data, which is actually, let's see if the real time would work. We're going to connect to a stream from the there should be data from any boat and vessel moving around Norway, and we want to print that real time on, visualize that on Bing Maps. This is doing the same job as before, where it's building a custom command. The custom command here will push, is going to call this function update vessel, which is about to push pins on Bing map, and I've got Big map all loaded. Let's go closer to Norway. And then I declare the command. I make sure that I can send it across. And now I'm building an RX query. So I've got the observable. I don't have Reactor. So I don't have the long-running observable pump in the cloud, but it's done on my machine, but I have an observable. And now I subscribe to those. And every time a position is coming out, we're going to toss out a command to JavaScript kernel. And what it's going to try to do is to append vessel as the data. And this is live now. This is live data coming from the whatever service that is, from the Norway government. And this, for example, about prototyping, right? So, and these were the being able to interactively prototype and include things. Of course, once you finish, you might build a very cool dashboard, or you build, another type of artifacts. But if in the early conversation between business analysts and engineers, the thing that I brought here is real code. To an extent, this is an investment that is easier to reuse in your company, as opposed to having a quick mock on whatever tool. Now, how do you go from Excel to an ASP.NET backend component? How do you go from a bunch of wires that you connected in some custom tool to your ASP.NET front end and whatever you do? This is all real code. This snippet, they're still valid. Because the thing is, you are looking at the Net Interactive, and I think this is the time for architecture. The Net Interactive at the core is what it does is very dumb. It gets command and it tosses out events. Finished. Now, some of the command handlers that you see are command handlers that handle submit code. So the fact that we're actually executing C# is if you want to an extent, is an implementation detail, because submit code is one of the command. This means that the tool that you're looking at is a command line tool. The one that you're looking at now is a command line tool that is talking via standard I/O to VS Code. So everything you type something, we toss commands out. This gets routed when it's C# to C#, F# PowerShell. If I don't know what that is, the connector you've seen is actually then routing that out to an external process, which is a SQL tool that then is also connected back to your backend. We also expose other protocol, 0MQ with Jupyter protocol, if you are into Jupyter Lab, HTTP with Teams, and that's HTTPS Signal R. But then you can take this entire infrastructure and drop it inside your app. So you can make your app an interactive kernel, and then through Connect, you can connect to this. So one of the videos that I've got, because unfortunately I don't have the full-on things working, is that we deployed, there is an application running on a robot, on a rover. That thing inside hosts .NET Interactive. The robot is doing its job, but when I want to change its behavior, I am rewriting the robot program on the fly from VS Code, where in the hash with the connect, I was connect via HTTP to the process over there. So me and my team were sharing one compute, and everybody was submitting code to the same compute, and those were running there. So I wasn't tethering; I was really shipping the code over and then the node will compute and stream events back to let me know about output to whatever you wanted. So you can see this as something you can embed in your custom apps, in your tooling. So that means that all of these could be actually shipped within a service, something that you leave server side, and then you submit the code. So still the whole architecture holds. Those are all NuGet package. So you can build a custom .NET app that's got this inside, and you can also expose the application itself as a variable that the code can interact with. So you can also expose your own environment as part of the .NET Interactive environment for the people coding.
As the performance is similar to like the native language, you could imagine this being taken into production quite readily. You know, they've got Excel.
It depends on security, right?
Run in Powershell. Yeah, that's a consideration. Yeah, if you've got Excel,
the main problem, but
this will definitely go. That'll be shipped live.
One thing that we do, so is that it is on the roadmap, is that if you give me a notebook, and remember, I just told you that all the libraries here are all things you see a NuGet package. You can build your own interactive experience. One thing that you could do very, very easily is that you can, and again, we're looking into that. Given a notebook, I can give you back a command line executable. So as a CI pipeline, you could compile. So imagine that all the prototyping really goes with a notebook. And when you call it a day and you want to go production, you compile the Polyglot notebook into an executable. Now this one is auditable and traceable. So now you can run the immutable version or the automated or headless version of the notebook in production for whatever you mean by production. But then, because we like to have fun, the same engine that you see is the .NET repo. Now here's where you got this project with the Fox's Spectra code, where now I can just and this is going through the same. It's only that now the front end is a repo, and then you can also do things like
That's a lot better than DOS.
and then and then you swap, and now that's where everything is lazy. Now I finished initializing. Now we're back to F#. I don't know if this one works. Oh, it does.
That's great, Diego.
Surprise.
Has anyone got any final questions before we wrap up?
I think I'd like to know where to look to sort of start with looking at some of this.
Yeah, if you could post some links, Diego, and I'll put them on the Meetup site as well, so everyone can get access to it.
So the main website is the interactive one, but if you want to have Lego, of course. one thing that we've done to simplify this is designed for students, so this is supposed to be something that you are able to run without even being an admin. If you're really new to everything, if you follow these steps, you get from I've got nothing into you've got VS Code with a Net Interactive and the SDK all gone and ready to go. The other thing that we've done is that the Net Interactive extension supports also URLs. So imagine that you want, if somebody has installed the whole ecosystem, you can just send them a URL correctly formatted, and that would just immediately open the notebook from. So I just loaded what they've got in the website in memory. So it's not downloaded anywhere, it's just loaded in here, and I can, this is the notebook for the, get started with C#. And there's quite few other interesting things that we are able to support, like this one, for example. I can open notebooks directly from GitHub without even cloning. So at this point, it's just talking to the repo. It's not going to clone anything. Yeah, it's taking its time. And now, what is it? This, for example, is how we test it. And this will be, I have not downloaded anything on my disk beside VS Code and the extension.
Okay, so there's a couple of links for everyone in the
So I
chat.
pasted the.
If you'd like to have a look at those.
There is one last thing I would like to show you, if we got time. Which is this notebook, which is this has been interesting. Is that with this notebook, I'm actually building a script that drives a browser completely. So now, for example, I'm using this to create a way for me to interact, and that could be way that you use for working in like test automation, for example. I'm loading a couple of NuGet package and extension so that if you got an image, the image get immediately displayed in line. And I'm using Playwright, which is a library that lets me do testing of web apps. And now I'm defining a function to just quickly get a screenshot and print it out. And now with this one, I'm just going to a web page. And I'm using a headless edge. And I'm going to click on this button through code. The header is gone. And you can use all these to create script automation where this thing will remain. So you can have the report. That's the beauty of the fact that notebook, you've got both the input and the output in the same place. You can imagine this running your test automation, and then you've got the artifact that you can share. Now this one is going to create an empty page, and it's going to pump any event that I do. They're going to be pumped into and added to the page. Now this is even more interesting, where I'm able to, I'm printing HTML. I'm gonna wait for that. And then every time this function is called in JavaScript, this system is pumping that back into here. So I can capture elements that this is a piece of JavaScript is executing. And this is more like the idea about the sharing. I have defined a data point class, and this JavaScript object, this JSON gets, I try to parse it to that schema.
That's great, Diego. I'm gonna have to go away and think about. It's one of these things where you watch it and you think it's kind of like the tip of the iceberg, and it's got so many applications and so many things you could potentially do.
It becomes what you want it to be.
Yeah, it could just take on a life of its own, and yeah.
Yeah, that, as I said, we started with the idea we're gonna do this to go, trying to give our .NET user the way to get into data scientists. But as we were going, you see that testing, troubleshooting, prototyping, or even just having the idea, you're working in the classic thing, you have an idea, you want to work into your businesses. I think we should do this before having to build, your working prototype could really be a notebook. You're using all the real tools. It's real .NET with real NuGet packages. You really can get in. You can even run ASP.NET endpoints. We've got notebooks where you just quickly bring up handlers, and those are real things that you can call.
Great stuff. Right. Thank you very much, Diego. I think we'll wrap up there. Thanks everyone for coming. And I didn't get any feedback in the chat about whether people are happy meeting up. So I'll have to sort of play it by ear and see if we can meet up face to face next time. I'm hoping so. It'd be great to see everyone
That'd
again.
be cool.
And yeah, and chat with people in the live. Okay. Good night, everybody. Thanks for coming.
Right. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thanks for the guitar work. That was amazing.